Welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 87. So guys, this week I am tackling yet another High Republic piece of content, and this time it is called The Monster of Temple Peak, which is a 4-part miniseries published by IDW Publishing. Now, if you haven't tuned in before, just to pre-warn, what I do is go through the plot details of each of these individual comics, and I also give additional information on connective tissue, including species and recurring characters, and sometimes trivia, just kind of depends what's inside of the content I am actually talking about. And I try and do it in a way that means that you can still read the comic after this and get loads out of it, but if you don't want to read the comic, either you don't have time or the facilities to do so, you can still understand the broad strokes of the plot. So this is part of the first phase of the High Republic era, so that takes place around 200 years before the Phantom Menace, and this one in particular, the story takes place after the Great Disaster, but before the Republic Fair, so that means it takes place at approximately 231 years before the Battle of Yavin, so this comes after Light of the Jedi, but it comes before the Rising Storm, so I think technically speaking it fits in Phase 1, Wave 2, but you don't actually need to have read any other High Republic content to enjoy this, although I would strongly recommend people do pick up The Rising Storm, either the book itself or the audiobook, because A, it's fantastic, and B, the main character in this Monster of Temple Peak comic is called Ty Yorrick, and she was introduced in The Rising Storm. She also has a brief appearance in Race to Crashpoint Tower as well, which is the book review I did last week, so make sure you check that out if you haven't already. And if you haven't checked out my Rising Storm review, I released it November 13th, 2021. If you're listening on YouTube, everything is in playlists, so you can find the High Republic playlist or the book reviews playlist. And if you're listening via a podcast app on the feed of Comics in Motion, then just scroll back to November 13th or type in the Rising Storm book review and it will surely come up. So let's get into a bit of information about the comic itself. So we've got The Monster of Temple Peak is the name. There are 4 issues in this miniseries. The first issue was released August 11th, 2021. The 4th issue was released November 17th, 2021. And as of recording this in sort of early February 2022, there has not been a trade paperback date confirmed. I believe they probably will do a trade paperback collection of these things, but the final issue only came out a few months ago, so maybe it's going to be later on in the year. But as of recording this, I'm afraid I do not have confirmation that a trade paperback is coming out or the date, although from what I can see online it's kind of a given that a trade paperback collection will be released. So the writer for this is Cavan Scott, who also wrote The Rising Storm and has written other High Republic content and things, and the artist for this is Rachel Stott. So Cavan Scott and Rachel Stott. It's basically the only difference in their names is Cavan has a C and Rachel has a T. Rachel Stott also did the covers for these issues, and then we've got 2 colour artists. One is Vita Efremova, and the other is Nicola Raihi. So just before I get into the crew, a very brief bio on Ty Yorrick. So she is a Tholothian, which is a species in Star Wars. So they have scaled craniums and then fleshy white or red tendrils coming off the back of their head. Kind of like instead of hair, they basically have these tendril things. And Ty Yorrick actually has a pink lightsaber, which is quite interesting. I think it reflects her character quite well. Her name is Tylera Yorrick in full, but she goes by Ty in present day. And in present day, so around the time of the Rising Storm and where the majority of this comic takes place, she is known as a Saber for Hire. So for an unknown reason, she left the Jedi Order or was kicked out of the Jedi Order or whatever, although she didn't have her lightsaber taken off of her, so that kind of raises a couple of questions in itself, and I believe they get answered fairly well in this comic run, so if you want to find that out by yourself, then I'd say, don't continue with this. Pick up the comic yourself. It's a really good comic. I thoroughly enjoyed it, but to remind people, it is by IDW Publishing, and I know a lot of you guys like to read along with Marvel Unlimited, so you can't find that on there. And once again, I don't know if IDW have an online app or anything like that, but I had to buy the physical copies. And just to further confirm her species, you can actually see Ty Yorrick on the cover of The Rising Storm. I believe it was Stellan Gios and Bel Zettifar, I think. It might be Elzar Mann, but regardless, it's Bel Zettifar, Ty Yorrick, and then another Jedi, either Stellan or Elzar. And If you still are not fully remembering what a Tholothian looks like, there are two which are in the prequel trilogy. One is called Adi Gallia and one is called Stas Ali. So Adi Gallia was in The Phantom Menace, you can kind of see her, and then she gets killed in the Clone Wars by Maul, and Stas Ali was like a cousin of hers. It was kind of partly a retcon, but not really. They basically wanted Adi Gallia to be in Revenge of the Sith, but then they couldn't get the same actress to wear all the prosthetics and things, and so because she looks so different, they were like, we can't have her being the same character, so they made her a cousin. But regardless, Stas Ali gets killed in Order 66. You actually see her killed in the montage when she's on a speeder bike, and then Order 66 happens and the two troopers go behind her and shoot her. That's when she dies. In the High Republic, there are other Tholothians, including Indira Stokes, who I believe she's on the cover of Light of the Jedi, and she actually becomes Bel Zettifar's master after Loden Greatstorm. So that bio information out of the way, let's get into the first issue, and just before I do that, here is the crawl. In the aftermath of the Great Disaster, Republic Chancellor Lina So prepares to unite the galaxy on Valo with a world-spanning Republic fair. But not all systems share in this spirit of unity, and not all is as it seems. As former Jedi Padawan turned saber for hire, Ty Yorrick will soon learn. I mean, this almost sounds like an introduction to Ty Yorrick for The Rising Storm, even though, as far as I can tell, this comic doesn't have any other connections to The Rising Storm. I might be wrong there, but I say any other connections as in direct story connections. I know this takes place before that, and I am fairly certain that after these events, she basically goes to the Republic Fair inadvertently because of like her monster hunting and things like that, which gets explained at the start of Rising Storm anyway. But yeah, let's get into issue number 1 then. So it starts off on the planet Loreth, which is mentioned, I think, briefly in The Rising Storm. And there's a young girl called Pella. She nabs her uncle's comms unit, and she wants to hear the Jedi signal from Starlight Beacon, and her uncle tells her to toughen up, and then they hear a loud throom noise in the background, and then it cuts somewhere else. And I just want to clarify here that her uncle is called Leighton, because he will pop up again. So meanwhile, on a planet called Blarum, which is also, I think, mentioned in The Rising Storm, Ty Yorrick is fighting a Gundark. Now, a Gundark is actually first mentioned in Empire Strikes Back. Han actually says to Luke after he heals from the confrontation with the Wampa that he looks strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundark. Then you actually get to see a Gundark for the first time in Legends. It is in the Star Wars comic number 51, which is actually before Empire Strikes Back. That's in the original Marvel Star Wars comics there. So really old school there. But the first time you actually see one in canon is in the Clone Wars episode Dooku Captured, which is episode 11 of season 1. They are also mentioned elsewhere in the canon and things. They're like a semi-common creature, like just one that generally everyone knows about. And they are from the planet Vancor. They are generally 2 meters tall. They have red skin and they have 4 arms. So yeah, Ty is fighting this Gundark, and her droid says that the Employer needs it alive. She's trying, there's like a few panels of her fighting with it and her trying to not use a lethal force. She gets hit away and then lands near this kid. The Gundark then attacks her and then this kid that's nearby her, and then she has no option but to kill the Gundark to save this kid. So a couple things to unpack here. So this kid is a Segredo. They're kind of like rabbit-esque humanoids. By the time of the Clone Wars, they seem to be all but extinct. At this time, their numbers are still waning, but they're not quite extinct yet. There is one Segredo, which is called Creeder in a Star Wars Adventures comic, which is seemingly, I think at the time, meant to be like one of the last ones. Although you don't find out this character's name until like the next issue, I'm just going to tell you. His name is Drewen, Drewen. And then Ty's droid is called KLO3. Nicknamed Klo. So back to the story, you've got Klo who is angry about Ty killing this Gundark and things, and then Ty questions Drewen. He said that he wanted to see her in action, and then she just leaves the kid there and then heads to a nearby spaceport on a speeder. She sees some Jedi there and specifically is trying to evade them, and then goes to this person. She's trying to sort out this deal as she's trying to sell this Gundark head to them and saying, look, I killed your monster. He's incredibly angry because he wanted the Gundark to be alive, so he gets his goons and thugs to then aim blasters at her. Before they can fire, the Jedi that she noticed slightly earlier then appear and try to arrest this dealer because he's dealing in exotic pets, which is illegal. In the chaos of that, Ty manages to slink away, and the Jedi do catch this dealer of theirs. Klo is then furious at Ty due to the amount of money that they have lost on that, and then it does the first flashback of these comics. So these flashbacks are approximately 10 years ago. It is when Ty Yorrick was a Padawan, and so this is around 241 years before the Battle of Yavin. So on a planet called Alaris Prime is the main moon of the planet Alaris, and it's in the Star Wars Adventures comic Return to Vader's Castle number 4. It was in Legends first, it was in a Clone Wars game, which until this episode I didn't even know there was a Clone Wars game, unless it's referring to the Flash game of the Clone Wars micro series that came out on the computer, because I remember playing as like Kit Fisto swimming through water and stuff. For some reason I have quite vivid memories of that. But also in Legends it was in a game called Galactic Battlegrounds. Alaris is actually in the Kashyyyk system, and the Kashyyyk system, as well as having Kashyyyk, also has Trandosha, which is where the Trandoshans are from, which may further explain the rivalry between the Trandoshans and the Wookiees because their planets are so near each other. So anyway, in this flashback, you've got Padawan Tylera is training sabers with another Padawan called Clias Terradine. So Clias Terradine is a Zeltron. Now Zeltron, they're basically looking like humans, apart from they are red-skinned, and they have like a couple of facial markings, and his eyes seem to be black but with white pupils, as opposed to, white with black pupils, as is often seen in comics when people are drawn eyes and things, just really simplistically. And a Zeltron was actually first in the A New Dawn book in the canon, which is about Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus, which is going to be when I finish the Plagueis book, which is a Legends book. I'm then going to be tackling A New Dawn, and I release the non-High Republic book reviews on my Patreon at the moment. Aside from the few that I've already got on this feed, like Master and Apprentice and things, I'm now releasing them in a slightly easier to digest format, slightly shorter, but they are on my Patreon. So if you want to hear some Star Wars book reviews, including the Legends book Shatterpoint, the Han and Lando story Last Shot, and the Clone Wars era novel, which is also canon, Dark Disciple, featuring Quinlan Vos and Asajj Ventress, then please consider checking out my Patreon page. For as little as £1 a month, you get access to hours and hours of additional content, including some Star Wars stuff that you don't get on this feed. And just in addition to that, Zeltrons were actually first in Legends. It was first in, once again, one of the original Star Wars comic runs by Marvel, and it was in issue number 70 that was released 1983. So Zeltrons have been about for a long time. So Ty is training with Clias, and she manages to best him in lightsaber combat, and then her master, Sibaba, approaches. He comments that Terradine is being arrogant and things, and Sibaba tells Ty to not pretend to be someone that she is not. Now, Sibaba, he is a species which is an Azumel. So Azumels, they're once again humanoid beings, but they have 6 eye stalks. You first get to see them in the game Force Arena, but on the big screen it was first in Solo: A Star Wars Story, and the characters are primarily extras or kind of small-time characters in it, so I will forgive you if you're not aware of who I'm speaking about or what the species specifically look like, but they look a little bit like the Gran, which are the kind of the goat-faced people with the eye stalks, but instead of them having the 2 eye stalks, they have 6, like 3 kind of coming out the sides of their heads to kind of wrap around the front. Quite cool designed aliens. I feel like I've seen them elsewhere in sci-fi, but that's neither here nor there. So back to the story. After that small interaction between Ty, her master, and Clias, it then cuts to now. So you've got KL-03 telling Ty that the ship needs desperate repairs and that they really needed that money. Now, Chloe is a protocol droid with female programming. She's very sarcastic, and to describe how she looks, she kind of looks like a cross between L337 from Solo: A Star Wars Story and like a Daft Punk, the band, their helmets. Kind of looks like a mix between those. And in this dialogue, Chloe then mentions that she wants to be called Chloe, but Ty says that she doesn't do nicknames. To decide where they go next, Ty then uses something called a Varasine stone. So it's just this bag full of these sort of small tablet things, and on one side it's a moon, the other side it's a sun, and you throw them down, and whatever the majority is, that's what you go with. Kind of like heads or tails, but instead of it just being like a flip of a coin, you flip a large handful of these, well, they're called stones, but they're more so small stone slabs, but still. So she flips these and tries to decide between going to Toydaria or to Loreth, and they head to Loreth. Now, Toydaria is where Toydarians are from, and the famous Toydarian you guys should all know is Watto from The Phantom Menace and a little bit of Attack of the Clones, the guy who basically owned Shmi Skywalker and also her son Anakin. So Ty heads to Loreth in her ship and things, and she's greeted. She's told about something called a Gretilax, which is there. They were thought to be extinct, but it was there and it actually attacked these villagers. So Ty decides to use the stones to decide whether or not she wants to take this job, and before she can actually throw them in the air and check them out and things, this little girl runs past her and kind of nudges her and things. She's like, hey, what? And it's confirmed this little girl is actually Payla, who is the niece of Leighton. And Leighton is the person that she is currently speaking to. So there's people from right at the start of this comic. Ty manages to throw the stones again, and they agree to help. So she heads to try and help them. She takes a creature called a Lyuna up the mountain, which I can't find anywhere else in canon or legends, but they're basically kind of like camels in a way. And as she's climbing up there, you've got Chloe, who is communicating with her via an earpiece and things. And Leighton mentioned that he named the place that Ty is now going as Temple Peak, after a temple on their homeworld. When Ty is on this Lyuna and climbing up this mountain, Chloe mentions that there doesn't seem to be a temple on these natives' planet, which is a bit odd. But before she can kind of elaborate on those thoughts anymore, it seems to cut out with static. And Ty seems quite happy about that because Chloe seems like a little bit of a nag. So it does another flashback, and it shows that Clias is going to sneak out of the Jedi Temple at night. He wants to take Ty with him, and basically he's going to something called the Yallo Sanctum. So not yellow, Yallo, Y-A-L-L-O, Sanctum. They are a group of Darksiders that haven't been around for many, many years, and he wants to basically go into their temple, find some interesting artifacts and stuff of theirs, and just learn more about the Force. They almost get caught by a Jedi who's kind of keeping watch and things, but they manage to pull out the way and avoid it, and in doing so they hold hands. It then cuts back to now, and it shows that Chloe manages to change her comm frequency and speak to Ty once again. Ty then tells Chloe to be quiet because she spots some prints in the snow, so she follows them a bit and notices that someone seems to be nearby who is invisible. This invisible being proceeds to then run away after Ty is on their trail, and then they fall into basically a giant spider's web. And that is where issue number 1 ends. So issue number 2 starts by Ty identifying this giant spider, and it is called a rock weaver. And when I say giant spider, I mean it's probably about the size, if you guys have seen Lord of the Rings Return of the King, the spider whose name escapes me that gets Frodo and stuff, kind of like that big. You see some spiders of similar size in The Hobbit, I think in the first Hobbit movie when they go into the forest. And so yeah, it's just not quite the size of Aragog in Harry Potter, but maybe sort of slightly bigger than some of the spiders that chase Harry and Ron in Chamber of Secrets. I'm doing a lot of comparisons to other nerdy stuff that I assume you guys have seen. I mean, if you were listening to this, you've watched all of Star Wars and you haven't embarked on Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, then shame on you. Because Harry Potter is phenomenal, one of the most consistent film series there are, and Lord of the Rings is even more phenomenal. I'd argue the best film trilogy ever made. Even though I like Star Wars, the original trilogy, more, I think Lord of the Rings, especially the extended editions, are near flawless. So if you're listening to this, stop wasting your time listening to me, go off and watch Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. And if you've obviously seen them, then you know the size of the spider I am explaining. And just to reiterate, they are called rock weavers, but they don't appear to be anywhere else in the canon. So Ty tries to let this invisible being out of this spider's web, and the rockweaver spits the web at Ty's face. She's trying to get it off her face and things, but it is seemingly slowly suffocating her because part of it covered her mouth, and so she tries to form a bond with the creature. She has a very short Padawan flashback of her master telling her like how to bond with the creature because it's part of the Jedi training and things, and it's something she's always kind of had difficulty with. So she's trying to bond with this rockweaver, but she can't really do it, and she can't figure out why. She makes a comment about another presence being there, and then she just kind of gives up trying to be subtle and uses the Force to bring some rocks down on this rockweaver that crushes it somewhat. It doesn't kill it because the rockweaver then scuttles off, and the droid Chloe then communicates to Ty saying, look, you need to use this sonic cutter to try and get out of the spider's web. You have to use it on a very specific frequency to allow it because nothing else will really get rid of it. And so she uses a sonic cutter, it frees her, and then she uses it on the person who's been webbed up who is invisible. As soon as this webbed up person is free, they then start to run. So Ty uses one of her rope things, throws it at this invisible person, catches them and ignites the blade into what would be their face and says, reveal yourself. And who is it? It is Druin, the Segredo from the first comic. So he confirms that his invisibility is due to something his species can do, and it's kind of like a mind trick, and it's kind of one of the reasons why I think that their species may have become extinct, because obviously if they can do that, or if it seems like their fur can become invisible, then I presume that would be quite a sought after thing. But they don't explicitly say that. There's just an offhand comment about, there's not many of us left, but it's quite handy being able to turn invisible because escaping predators and people trying to hurt you. He reiterates that he came here to learn from Ty Yorrick, who's a Jedi. She refutes that and says that she's not a Jedi and she's also not a teacher. She tells him to leave, and so he does. He hangs his head in shame and walks away down the mountain. Chloe then speaks in Ty's ear and says that he's going to die if you leave him, you need to go after him, and after a bit of back and forth, Ty then reluctantly agrees and goes after him. He's incredibly thankful. He tells a bit of his backstory. Basically, his village was captured, his people were enslaved, and then his brother managed to put him in an escape pod and get him to escape, because they only just had a chance for this, because when the Great Disaster happened, which is within a year of this occurring, probably within 6 to 8 months really, the Great Disaster happened, so the marauders that took him and his village, they couldn't travel in hyperspace and things. If you want more information on that, check out my Light of the Jedi review or read the book itself. So when they were distracted and the marauders couldn't travel through hyperspace, Druin's brother then puts him into an escape pod and then gets him free, but unfortunately Druin's brother was killed in doing so. Druin comments that he remembers the stories that his brother would tell him about the Jedi and things. Then he asks Ty, was she kicked out of the Order or did she leave? And that leads on to another flashback. So the flashback shows Ty and Clias climbing up the side of this mountain. Clias says that if they understand and know the dark side, they may actually be able to fight it better, which is kind of the point of the Jedi. Ty then slips, and before she falls, Clias manages to grab her. He is standing completely horizontally, feet on the side of this cliff, and holding onto her with his hands. She's questioning how on earth that happened, and he said he was shown by his master in some Zepho teachings. So what is a Zepho, I hear you ask? Well, if you'd played the game Jedi Fallen Order, which is amazing and I highly recommend it, it's a canon game, so the whole campaign is within the canon. It's a lot of fun. And in that, it's all about the Zepho. So I tackle it a little bit there's a comic miniseries called Jedi Fallen Order Dark Temple. I tackled that in episode 12 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so quite early on. I give a bit of information on the Zepho there, and Seer Junda's master, Eno Cordova, is in that Dark Temple comic quite a lot, and he's also quite central to the plot of Jedi Fallen Order as well, so you get a bit of information about that. But in short, the Zepho were ancient beings, and they were Force sensitive, and they could use the Force specifically. They had a lot of temples and a lot of architecture and things, but I'm not going to delve into the entirety of the Jedi Fallen Order game, but they seem to have disappeared. It's unknown whether they've become extinct or they've just gone out into the unknown regions and things. There's kind of hints of both, but if you want to find out more information on that, you will have to play the game, because I can't just sit here and tell you all the lore of the Zepho from one throwaway line. Anyway, Clias manages to help Ty, and they manage to then get to the temple shortly after. Clias cuts a hole into the side of the temple and then enters. He steps on a little plate on the floor, which then shoots out some arrows. Ty fortunately manages to stop him by diving in the way and basically tackling him out of the way of these oncoming arrows. She says that he needs to be more careful, and he comments that nothing can hurt them. So it cuts back to now, and it shows that Druin is asking about how Ty became a monster hunter then. He asks her about her first kill, and then she has this horrible flash of fear and things. And then she lights a fire in quite a dramatic fashion right near Druin and things. And he's like, okay, I see that I've kind of crossed the line. I'm really sorry. I'm just going to go to sleep now. So after a dirty look or two, then Ty eventually goes to sleep and things. And then shortly after, they are woken up by their Lyuna waking up and then just bolting, freaking out and running away. Ty gets up and then looks around and tries to work out what's going on, and then a little girl jumps and attacks Ty with a stick. She jumps off this slightly higher part next to Ty. It's confirmed that it's that girl, Pela, and Ty manages to stop this girl by just holding onto the stick she tried to swipe her with, and she throws her off, and then the girl tries to tackle her again, but obviously she's quite small and not very strong, especially against a Force user, and after a bit of tussling, this girl then pulls out a blaster. Ty then just deflects it with a lightsaber. The deflection goes near Pela, and then she's kind of startled and things, and in her being startled, she then falls off the back of a cliff. Ty dives to the edge of the cliff and grabs her with the Force and is trying to pull her up to save her, because it's a big drop. In doing this, she sees Clias saying, "I've got you," with an eerie smile on his face. She loses her focus and then drops the girl, and she just falls into the darkness. She comments to herself that she's really, really sorry about losing that girl and things, and then Druin tries to comfort her, and eventually they both go back to sleep. Then the morning sun comes up, and Ty notices that Druin is starting to pack up his stuff and leave. Ty says to Druin that he can go with her, and he's like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, my mule basically went, so you can carry my supplies." He says, "Thanks, master," and she's like, "Don't push it." So that brings us on to issue number 3. So you've got Ty and Druin are now walking, and Ty slips off the edge of a cliff but uses her saber to grab onto the edge of the cliffside. Then she asks to grab Druin's hand and then basically throws him to the other side of this small cavern. She shortly after that follows him, and they reach a cave entrance. So it then does a flashback once again. There's 1 or 2 per each of these issues. Ty is walking around this temple with Clias, muttering to herself, "No fear, only certainty." Clias wants to take some treasures back to the Jedi temple and things, and he mentions a soothsaber and a Vitilicron. So a soothsaber, I don't know what that is. I presume it's like a lightsaber, but not quite the same. There's quite a few things in Canon. There's like a proto-saber and lots of other things, both in Canon and also in Legends. There's far more of just kind of lightsaber copycats in certain ways, using different technology and etc. But I couldn't find an explicit explanation as to what a soothsaber is. However, a Vitilicon, so Vitalicron, obviously that sounds a lot like a holocron, and I think that was intentional. So a Vitilicron was first in the Star Wars Legends game, The Old Republic. It was in a few other bits and pieces of Legends, and it hasn't really been in much canon content since. If anything, I think this is actually the first time it's reappeared in canon. In Legends, the description is fairly similar to what's described in this comic. It's basically used by the Voss to store memories and visions of those who went through the healing practices of the Voss mythics. That's the Legends explanation. And the canon explanation is it's basically like a holocron, and it has a genetic lock on it. Because it's like a holocron, it has some unknown amount of information stored in there. So Ty doesn't want to steal anything, and something feels a bit off. Clias is holding this Vitilicron, makes a comment about it having this genetic lock, and then suddenly something happens, and he sees this panel of like many strange looking faces and things. He drops the Vitilicron, and his eyes go completely white, and then he yells "run" to Ty Yorrick in a strange voice. So come back to now, you've got Ty and Druin are in this cave. Druin is talking, and then the monster, the Grettalax, then roars and charges at them. To describe the Grettalax, I've taken some photos and things, and there's one panel you can kind of see what it looks like in the photos I've taken, but obviously if you really want to see what it looks like, pick up the comic. But they basically look like a giant bantha, but with horns that aren't like in a spiral shape. They're kind of like, they go out in one direction, they bend slightly in the middle, and then go a slightly adjacent direction. They have this like triangular head that kind of looks like an armored shark. So if you imagine a bantha with slightly pointier horns going out to the side of their heads as opposed to spiraling, and instead of the big kind of fun bantha face, imagine like a shark head, but it's like armor plated with what looks like metal, with a few like eyes dotted around the main eye that are glowing green, and then big horrendous teeth that kind of look a little bit like Venom's teeth from Spider-Man. Or more aptly, probably a shark, which would fit a lot more with the imagery that I was giving you. So you've got quite a few panels here of some action and things that looks really cool. You've got Ty basically tussling with this monster and things. Druin wants to help, and he's not doing a great job. He tries to throw a rock at the monster, which completely misses the monster and actually hits Ty, and she yells at him to stop helping. So Druin then is looking around trying to find something else to help, and he finds Pela wrapped up in a web, which is that girl who fell off the cliff moments ago in the prior comic. So Ty is still tussling with the Grettalax, and she drops her lightsaber. She tries to use the Force to get it and retrieve it, but in doing so she causes some rocks to fall down, and both her and the Grettalax get buried. She seemingly isn't that hurt, and the Grettalax seemingly isn't that hurt either, and then some rock weavers appear, like quite a few of them. Druin then tries to launch at the rock weavers with Ty's lightsaber, trying to save her, and Ty commands him to stop. She uses the Force to pull the saber from him. They then watch the rock weavers start to help the Grettalax, and it seems to be controlling them with the Force. Which would explain why in the earlier comic when she tried to use the Force to bond with a Rockweaver that she couldn't before, because it seems the Grettalax was actually controlling them first. So Ty then tries to bond with the Grettalax, and then she has this kind of like Force vision, but it's also somewhat of a mind read. It's quite a cool set of panels. She sees the Grettalax commanding the Rockweavers to save Pela when she's falling and things, and it seems like they want to help. It then shows its rampage, and Pela's uncle is shooting at it and things, and Pela is trying to stop her uncle from shooting at it with this weapon. She gets in the way of him after he's just shot this creature, and his shot as it hits the Grettalax explodes, which is what hurts the girl, causing her to have a vocal issue. So this is why she isn't talking or anything, because in the first issue, Leighton actually says that the reason she can't talk is because the Grettalax attacked, and then an explosion happened, and then the smoke and stuff basically damaged her vocal cords. But obviously this flashback shows that was not the case. It was actually him who was the cause of her being unable to speak. And after Pela is hurt in this protection kind of act and things, she still wants to try and help the Grettalax even though it's rampaging through her town. Ty's vision then furthers on more, but you don't quite get to see what she saw, and then she comes to and kind of wakes up from it. And she says to Druin that she has learnt the truth of what the monster did, and it will not stand. So she ignites her lightsaber and is near enough to the monster, and then issue number 3 ends. So with that all in mind, we move on to the final issue, issue number 4. So issue 4 starts with Leighton and T'Pel, and so Leighton obviously being Pela's uncle, and T'Pel is like a friend of Leighton's assumedly, and then Leighton also has this kind of gang around him, a posse, a group of villagers with guns. So you've got T'Pel, or Tapel, T-A-P-E-L, T'Pel. He is a species called a Boosodian, Boosodian. So they're humanoids, once again, and they have like quite circular heads that have got 20 eyes on them, which is pretty freaky. Even in comic form, it's quite unnerving. And they're actually first in The Rise of Skywalker, so they're quite a new species in the Star Wars canon. Among T'Pel and Leighton, there are a few other species as well. There's a Gungan, who is an Ottola Gungan. So Gungans have got 2 subspecies. The Ottola, which is like Jar Jar Binks, like the majority of Gungans you see in The Phantom Menace. And then there's also an Ankura Gungan. Ankuras are the bigger, more green Gungans, like Boss Naz, the guy who's played by Brian Blessed, does the kind of noise. He's an Ankura, so there's 2 subspecies of Gungans. And then there's also a Saurian woman there. Now, Saurian is the species that Kai Adimundi actually is. So, a friend of mine calls him Turnip Head. So he's basically the one with the really tall, long head. And this Saurian woman also has a tall head, much like that. So this group of villagers are in this cave, and there's shown to be a locked cage nearby that has got some blankets covering it. Ty shows up and then calls them all monsters. She goes over to the cage after doing a couple of flips and things and yelling at them somewhat, and opens the cage to reveal a creature that is similar to the Grettalax. So she confirms that the Grettalax is actually 2 beings. So this creature in the cage is the Lax, and the other big creature that was in the prior comic is the Greta. The 2 beings are joined in a very balanced harmony, and they need to be together. T'Pel says to Leighton that this is all wrong, and that he told Leighton it was wrong and things, and then Leighton just punches T'Pel in the face and drops him to the floor. So Ty then squares up to Leighton, and then before anything can really happen, she is stunned by being shot from behind. It shows that T'Pel was actually the person that stunned her, and that they created the distraction with the being punched and stuff to distract Ty. With Ty on the floor passed out, they've confirmed that they will secure the animal and also Ty. So then we get another flashback, and I think this is the last flashback of these comics. So we've got Ty, who is telling Clias to fight whatever is causing him problems in his mind. He said that he's scared and he can hear a voice and things, and she says, look, it's just a trap. It's not real. This is part of when you touch this object of some sort, it's clearly some sort of mechanism to scare off temple thieves and artifact thieves and stuff. He then yells at her liar and force pushes her away, and then ignites his lightsaber and charges at her. She ignites her blade and then starts deflecting his blows and things, and he's yelling things at her like that she should have stopped him going in there, and she should have told the masters about it. Why did she let him go? All these sort of things which would indicate he is heavily consumed by the dark side of the Force. There's quite a few back and forths with them, exchanging lightsaber blows and things, but obviously Ty is, as evidenced in the first issue, a slightly better duelist than Clias is, and she gets backed up against a wall. She's yelling stop to him, and then there is a sudden stopping of any noise. The panel then pans out and shows that she has her blade ignited through the chest of Clias. And all he says to her is, Ty, and then collapses to the floor. And Ty's left there in this temple by herself saying, oh my stars, basically what have I done? And that's the end of all the flashbacks and stuff. That's why I said in the intro part where it's kind of I would presume we're going to get more information on that, because at the end of this comic it does say Ty Yorrick will return, be it either in Fallen Star, which I have now received today as of recording this, so I'm going to be reading that over the coming weeks, but whether or not her backstory is mentioned in that I don't know, or if she's going to get another mini-series or anything, I don't know, but what I assume happened is after she inadvertently killed Clias, then she just bailed from there. She just left and went off by herself, which would explain why she's trying to evade the Jedi, because they probably don't really know what happened to her, and also would explain how she managed to keep her lightsaber, because as shown in the Clone Wars, I'm not going to spoil it, even though you should have really watched Clone Wars by now and know what happens, but a certain character leaves the Jedi Order and has to give their lightsaber up to leave and things. So I think it's quite a common practice. And there's been other instances where Jedi have been banned from the Order or exiled or whatever, and they have to give up their lightsabers. So then it cuts back to now in the story, and you've got Ty hanging upside down by chains above this grinding machine thing of lots of gears. Leighton and co. have confirmed that they actually came to Loreth specifically for the Grettalax, because its horns, when made in a specific potion, can actually grant the drinker incredible power, which would allow them to protect their planet against intruders and things. But they confirmed that the Jedi's bones would actually work as a powerful replacement So they activate the machine that is essentially going to strip Ty's flesh from her bones, which is pretty graphic. As she's slowly getting closer and closer to the gears of this machine, Druin and some Rockweavers show up to cause word distraction and also to fight against these villagers. Druin manages to obtain Ty's lightsaber and then throws it to her. She manages to catch it, gets herself free, and slices the machine in half. The Rockweavers, while this is happening, start to web up the rest of the villagers, but Leighton runs away. Ty pursues Leighton, and eventually he stops when the Greta is in front of him. Leighton then starts begging for his life and apologising, saying, I shouldn't have taken your mate, it was wrong of me, please spare me, basically just grovelling and things. Ty says, Druin, did you get that? And Leighton's like, what? And then Druin appears, obviously he was next to her and he was invisible, and he recorded it using the comlink thing that Chloe had. Obviously Chloe gave it to Ty, and assumedly in this plan, she gave it to Druin. So it's confirmed that Druin managed to record this, and the transmission is being sent to Chloe back on Ty's ship, and now Chloe is broadcasting this to the entirety of the village to show what Leighton has done. Ty leaves Leighton in front of the Greta, and then goes over to find where the Lax is. So she goes over, they get the cage open, and the Lax is freed. And then the Lax charges towards the Greta, and they connect. The Lax is kind of like a Greta, but it's much more thin. It's kind of like a ferret kind of thing, but a giant ferret. And its head is, once again, this triangular thing. The Greta and the Lax connect to each other. The Lax gets on the back of the Greta, and then the triangle part of its head connects with there's like an indent in the top of the Greta's head, and they combine to make the Greta Lax. They heal each other because obviously they've had wounds and things from fighting the villagers and etc. And once they've healed each other, they then go over to where Pela is on the floor and heal her as well. So then we get to the final parts of this comic. So we've got the villagers who agree to live in peaceful harmony with the Greta Lax. I don't know what's happened to Leighton, it doesn't seem to have been confirmed. I like to think he was killed by the Greta Lax because I'm harsh, but I guess maybe we'll find it in the future, or maybe it will just be a mystery. But the villagers, they agree to live with the Greta Lax in peace, and Ty gives Druin her, stones, the Varasine stones that she uses to make decisions, saying that she doesn't think she's going to need them anymore. But she leaves him behind with the villagers because she works alone. Pela talks to him and says, you're more than welcome here, we need as much help as we can get, so there will be a home here for you. So back on Ty's ship, Chloe is speaking to her and says that her and Druin actually worked well together. Ty says, yeah, I guess, but still, I work alone, and then finishes what she was saying to the droid by calling her Chloe, which is nice, because obviously she said she didn't use nicknames, and there she does, which does mean a lot to the droid. So she goes off to train and leaves Chloe there. While Chloe is in the bridge by themselves, they communicate to Druin. Chloe wants to basically sort out Druin and Ty accidentally bumping into each other, and Druin is very happy about that. And the final page of this comic shows that Ty Yorrick is training with 3 orbs, which we have seen recently in a certain live action show, but you saw it in A New Hope. The 3 training orbs, they are called Marksman H training remotes, and they're the things that Luke used when he first got his hands on the lightsaber on the Millennium Falcon with Obi-Wan to train and stuff. I think you get to see them in the prequels as well. They're quite a commonly used thing for Jedi to train with, and that's where the comic ends with saying, Ty Yorrick will return. And so there we are, my friends. That is the end of episode 87 and the end of The Monster of Temple Peak featuring Ty Yorrick. As I said, if you've listened to this and you haven't read The Rising Storm or listened to my Rising Storm book review, please go check that out, because in all my book reviews that I release on this channel/feed, I do spoiler free for the first third, then mild spoilers for the middle third, and then towards the end I normally give broad strokes of plot information just for anyone who doesn't have time to read the books but still wants to enjoy the content and stuff. So with that in mind, what have we got coming up? So next week is going to be the 2nd volume of the High Republic comics, which is by Cavan Scott once again. It is going to be 2 storylines put together, which are Heart of the Drengir and Shadow of the Nile. They're going to be issues 6 to 10. That is going to be Phase 1, Wave 2. So they are going to be set around the time / slightly after the Rising Storm. Then the week after that, episode 89 is going to be Poe Dameron, the 2nd volume of those. So obviously it's the Poe Dameron ongoing series by Charles Soule. I think there's 31 issues of Poe Dameron in total, so that equates to 5, maybe 6 volumes of them. So I'm going to be doing that, for the first half of this year or so. Then the week after that, episode 90 is going to be the High Republic Adventures Volume 2, which once again will be Phase 1, Wave 2, sort of adjacent or parallel rather to the Rising Storm and also to the 2nd volume of the High Republic comics. But the High Republic Adventures comics are also by IDW Publishing and they are written by Daniel Jose Older. Then after that, I imagine the mini-series I'll be tackling is going to be Trail of Shadows, which is also by Daniel Jose Older. That is High Republic Comics. It's a 4-part mini-series, and it is by Marvel. That's once again Phase 1, Wave 2. I'm also going to, at some point soon, sort out my book review for Out of the Shadows, which is the young adult novel from Phase 1, Wave 2. And then that should be all of the High Republic content, all the books reviewed, and all the comics done from that first phase and the second wave. And then shortly after that, I should have finished reading Fallen Star, which once again I received today, so I'm very excited to read that. Then once I've tackled the book review of Fallen Star, I will then go on to the remaining High Republic and High Republic Adventures comics, which are from the first phase, but the third wave. And then we'll kind of see how they kind of go over the coming months to see how far they stretch before they stop, because the next phase of the High Republic is going to be set 150 years prior to the first phase. So as far as I understand, there's going to be the 3 phases of the High Republic, and they're kind of going similarly to the original prequel and sequel trilogies of Star Wars. So set at a certain era, then the prequels to that, and then the sequels to that, quite simply put. But yeah, so book reviews and other stuff sort of coming up. Obviously, a lot of it is currently High Republic centric, but I just found out recently they're going to be doing an Obi-Wan Kenobi ongoing series, as well as the Han Solo and Chewbacca ongoing series. Not to mention, in addition to that, we've still got the Crimson Reign sort of crossover event going through, which is the successor to the War of the Bounty Hunters, and that is continuing through the run of comics Darth Vader, Dr. Aphra, Star Wars, and Bounty Hunters. So I will be tackling all of those soon-ish. I'm just going to kind of see how the Crimson Reign sort of stuff ends, and we'll kind of go from there to see kind of, because at the moment, as I said, they are somewhat connected, but they're not overly connected. You know, War of the Bounty Hunters, all of it was like intertwining, especially the auction for Han Solo. You know, when that was happening, all of the comics were all intersecting at the same point, and all the characters were like in the same area. So it worked really well as a one-off episode, whereas what I've been reading thus far, especially the Star Wars comics, they're off doing their own completely different thing. So is Dr. Aphra, and so is Darth Vader. I assume for the Crimson Reign, it's kind of going to be like a interlude sort of thing. And then the third final crossover thing that Charles Soule has confirmed is going to be going ahead, but he hasn't yet named it. I'll be tackling that as well. So that's kind of what you can expect for the year. As I said, I'm trying not to do 100% High Republic stuff, but there's just a lot of High Republic stuff coming out, and I am saving my book reviews that are either Legends or for the sort of peripheral canon books for my Patreon. So if you do want to get even more Star Wars content, including exclusive book reviews that don't get released elsewhere, certain early access to things that get released on this channel, as well as photos of the comics that I release on social media, they get released generally on Thursdays over on Patreon, whereas on my social media it's normally on the weekend or sometimes even early the following week. So if you want early access to the photos of the comics I tackle, as well as exclusive book reviews, as well as the Afterthought show that myself and Megan do, which is at least once a week, we do a review on something. It's normally a series or a movie. If it's a newer movie, it's spoiler free. If it's an older movie, then it's slightly older. And we've just started recording a lot of our Tom Hanks rewatch, which I'm quite excited for. So we did Big, we've done The Burbs, we're due to watch Turner and Hooch next, and I think it's Joe versus the Volcano, and then it's A League of Their Own, and then we get onto Forrest Gump, which I'm very excited for because that's one of mine and Megan's favourite movies. So if you want to hear, you know, certain MCU stuff, some Star Wars stuff, we're also doing Harry Potter things, as well as some series we've been doing, like I've done Witcher series 1 and 2, we did Schitt's Creek, we've done like a lot of series that we basically finish, we record our spoiler-free thoughts on, then, you know, please consider checking out patreon.com/genuine Chit-Chat, because it would mean the world to me if you guys could contribute financially, especially to help me fund the purchasing of these IDW publishing comics and my Marvel Unlimited subscription, and also all the other comics that I buy as well in like physical form, as well as all the books that I buy for High Republic as well. So lots of costs, which obviously are a labour of love, but if anyone wants to contribute to that, and in addition to contributing, you get access to hours and hours and hours of additional content, which gets updated weekly, might I add. So you'll get this feed, Genuine Chit-Chat, and the Patreon feed, which you can put the link to that in pretty much any podcast app as well. Then please consider checking out my show, as it means the absolute world to me of any supporters. If you don't want to support the show financially, that's completely understandable, but you can do a few other things to help out. You can share on social media, you can talk to your friends, you can rate and review. On Spotify now, they let you do 5-star ratings, so please give this a 5-star on Comics in Motion's feed. You can also write reviews on Good Pods or Podcast Addict or Apple Podcasts, any of those sort of places you can write reviews, which really, really helps. And if you want to help me specifically and you're a listener, please go over to my YouTube channel and subscribe to that. A link is in the description because once I get to 100 subscribers, I can then change my channel link name. And I know almost no one listens on YouTube. You are all, like 99% of you listen on podcast apps, which I hugely appreciate. But if a few more of you could kind of just go over to YouTube and subscribe to me, that would really, really help me out. And it's a lot less effort than having to write a review or become a Patreon supporter or anything like that. And then the final things to say here really is obviously check out my show Genuine Chit-Chat. I speak to a wide variety of guests on there. Claudia Gray, Paolo Villanelli, Dominic Pace, Star Wars Explained. Lots of Star Wars centric people and a lot of people that have nothing to do with Star Wars as well. But in addition to that, on this very feed of Comics in Motion and also on YouTube, you get the video versions of most of the conversations I've had. We are doing a weekly Boba Fett discussion show. So myself and a variety of guests all talk about our thoughts week by week on the Book of Boba Fett. And as of recording this, the finale came out yesterday, which I have just watched. I'm not going to spoil for you here because that would just be mean. But we are going to be talking about that. Huge filled with spoilers. It should be myself and 4 other individuals to get this finale sorted. And then the Kenobi show has been confirmed to be starting May 25th. So you can expect another weekly discussion show on that live action series. I think there's going to be 6 episodes of that. And it's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the feed of Comics in Motion, rate, review, share with your friends, support on Patreon, do all those lovely things, and you'll have a huge portion of my undying love and appreciation. But I just want to say thank you so much for listening. As always, guys, I appreciate each and every one of you for listening, especially all the way up to my nattering end. I hope you guys have a good day. I will speak to you next week with the High Republic Volume 2 Marvel Comics. And as always, guys, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.